very similar in some ways. It was quite strange. I think you both sort of like retired from the programme by then, haven't you?
Yes, Peter and I spent a lot of time Planet Farm sitting in the back of a large white car, gazing into the distance of Lanzarote, wondering what on earth we were doing there. But I think that came across in our performances, which I wouldn't rate very highly. Let's have another question. Yes. Well, I suppose Peter Grimway's, because he wrote the script. Well, to be honest, yeah, I mean, it had to be. It was set in a school, that story, and Turlough was brought in this disguise of a schoolboy character, so he was at the school. I chose the costume, I chose the shirt and whatever.
I think John Nathan Turner would have been happier, because when Mark came back from having gone out with the costume buyer, he said, Mark put his costume on, he said, "Oh my God, you look like a funeral director." Because I think he expected Mark to come back with sort of like a stripy blazer and a sort of boater and a much more sort of jazzy image of.
I'm a miserable sod, you see, so I came back dressed like a funeral director, and John said, "This is dreadful. It needs some colour." So I said, "Well, you know, you can choose the socks." And John did actually choose the socks from that point onwards. I had incredibly colourful socks, which nobody ever saw. But,
yeah.
But it seemed to me there was a problem with Turlough, right? That Turlough was fine when he was in the first 8 episodes and was a very integral part of the story. But in the context of a half-hour episode, which you're doing 4 episode stories, Turlough couldn't work because he was too powerful a character. You had the Doctor, you had an assistant, you had the evil person of the week, or of the 4 episodes, you had the baddie, and there wasn't room for another plot. Which is why Turlough, as I said last night, used to get locked up episodes 2 or 3 and let out end of episode 4. Because there just wasn't room for Turlough. And one of the reasons I wanted a constant costume was because nobody would ever have known who the hell Turlough was after a while if he kept changing his costume every time. Apart from the fact that he was the one bound and gagged and being tortured. Or, you know.
I mean, I think Mark's best story was Mordrin Undead, but I mean, we were sort of trying to edit it to have a tape that Mark could use. No, but the fact was that Mordrin Undead was a good story, but the worst part about Mordrin Undead was Mordrin and all those things. And every time we got to a scene with those things, we think, cut it, get it out, get it out. No, we don't want that scene.
Yeah, so whatever the question was, that's the answer. Yes? Yes.
Well, it's funny. I'll start with Bonnie first, because Bonnie in England has a sort of like, because she was a child sort of star, she has this sort of like brat image, and people are very quick to have a go at her. And Mark had met her a few times and said, "Look, she's really very nice," and I believed him, but thought
I'd done a tour with her in America, and I've got some Doctor Who convention.
But I still thought, no, she's bound to be nauseating. She's bound to be. And actually, when I met her, I was really surprised because she's so nice and sweet. I think she's very talented. I don't think she is a good actress in that sort of way. She's a fantastic singer and dancer, and I think that she wasn't really at home in Doctor Who and didn't really enjoy it, because the thing about working constantly on a television series is it can become extremely. I mean, I like a lot of exercise, and I find that to actually do all the things you want to do in a day, which is like, for me, I like to go for a swim or go for a run or do something, take the dog for a walk. You've really got to push yourself and be very strict with yourself, or and then you get overtired. And Bonnie, who is used to sort of like doing lots of dance classes and keeping really fit, found that actually the regime of working on something like Doctor Who was really frustrating for her, and that I think she wasn't really happy and at home with what she was doing.
Can I just, before you talk about Sylvester, I'll tell you what the regime of doing Doctor Who is. It is Monday to basically Saturday lunchtime for a couple of weeks. You rehearse, and if you're a regular, you're there from 10 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock at night, possibly 5:30. And then the end of the second week, beginning of 2.5 weeks, you do a 4-day or 3-day studio. Then you have a day off and you're back into rehearsal again. So it's pretty tough. The studios go from 8 in the morning till 10 at night.
I mean, basically
so
when Mark was on it, it was when I used to go to the studios a lot. And I mean, and one reason was because I was sort of interested in it. I hadn't done very much television, so it was interesting for me, and also because Doctor Who is such a British institution, and I'd watched it when I was a kid. But I mean, the other reason was that, I mean, it was particularly difficult when Mark was on it, because it was every other week. It was 3 nights till 10 o'clock, and also they got out of sync, and so they were working weekends and having Mondays off at one point, and it was just, it's the thing is, if you're an assistant, they have all these guest artists who are often very sort of respected actors, and oh yes, of course, you can come in at 11 and go home at such and such a time, and the assistants were always the ones that were kept hanging around all the time. And also the guest artists can be, you know, if I was some of the younger actors, I mean, I'm getting a bit old for that, but some of the younger actors that I was working with on Paradise Towers were just really keen, and they wanted to rehearse things, and you think, oh no, I want to go home, I want to take the dog for a walk, and it's like that. I'm bored, because I mean, with something like Doctor Who, I very much enjoy actually doing it and doing the studios and doing the sort of filming and things, but the rehearsals can be just so tedious because the characters have no emotional depth. So there's not anything to be got out of going over and over and over it again once you've learnt the lines. But sometimes I think it gets frustrating for the companions, doesn't it? Because you get people...
Yeah, I mean, it's a dramatised comic strip, Doctor Who. I mean, I love Doctor Who, but that's what it is. I mean, life is not about big green slimy monsters chasing you down corridors. No, it depends what you're on, I suppose. Perhaps it is for some people, but... Yeah, you're there for the director to work out his camera shots, right? And typically a director will work, you know, the director will be, and you'll be acting, and the director will be going... and then writing things down. And you do it ad nauseum, 25 times. I remember one studio, it was a studio for Mordred Undead, where the Brigadier had all that walking about as the 2 Brigadiers. And the first producer's run we had were that Nick just walked around this room without with sticky tape, the set. He just walked around for 25 minutes in total silence. That was the beginning of the producer's run. It is crashingly tedious. I remember Polly James, she was sort of acting, and she'd walk up the steps, but she'd pretend they were actually steps. And Doctor Who's not about that. She wanted conversations about her character and her relationship with me at one point. I said, look, Polly, I just really think I want to go home. And it's just, you accept what Doctor Who is. It's interesting coming out of Doctor Who that this is, I think, one of the things why it can be a problem for some people coming out of Doctor Who, is that people think that's the only way you can act, that you actually are sort of totally over the top. But that is what Doctor Who is about. Doctor Who is about instant death, instant pain, instant happiness, instant saving the universe. So you act that. It's absolutely instant. Yes, so that's I suppose. But Sylvester McCoy, finish. I can remember that question.
I know. I was just remembering it. I enjoyed working with Sylvester. I think because he just started. I mean, it was only his second story. He was still a bit sort of nervous about it because, of course, when you start as the Doctor, everybody's there thinking, no, he's not as good as such and such a body. No, it's not my fit. And he had a lot of sort of stick about the fact that his costume looked like he'd sort of rifle the wardrobes of all the other Doctors and things like that. And I think he was a little bit on the defensive. But no, he hadn't taken over the role that the Doctor has to take in the production, which is that you are like the big daddy, if you know what I mean, and you look after people. He was still very much an individual actor doing his bit in the production. Do you see what I mean? I mean, the Doctor becomes the person in the production who welcomes all the guests. So, you know what I mean, don't you? Who sort of makes everybody else feel at home. And he hadn't actually taken on that role then. So, if that answers the question.
I suppose Sylvester had, I mean, unlike most of the other Doctors, had not really done very much television as well. So that's a big difference between somebody, they say, like him or, you know, Pete or Tom or Pat when they did it, or, you know. But in fact, all the other Doctors, they were all very experienced.
He hadn't got the thing, because of course the Doctor always has sort of more lines than everybody else, usually. And when the Doctor gets sort of like used to their role, I mean, when you are playing a role for a long time, like did a character on a series called Emmerdale Farm, and after a while you don't actually have to learn your lines because you're so used to your character. It sort of just feeds in. You don't really have to sit down and think about it, and after a while you're not aware that the Doctor has got a lot more lines than other people because he just sort of does them. And Sylvester hadn't actually reached that point. You were very aware that he had a heavier workload than other people because you had to do a lot of things for his benefit that in rehearsals and things because he hadn't got. I mean, I'm not. I don't. I'm not saying.
It's not knocking Sylvester. I mean, it is experience as an actor in different forms. Sylvester's much more experienced in the theatre than, say, somebody like Peter. Peter would need much more rehearsal to do a theatre play than Sylvester would. It's just different actors in different situations. But I do think that came across in Sylvester's first episodes that he wasn't quite firmly fixed enough. He wasn't quite confident enough as the Doctor. He wasn't, hadn't got that together. Well, I think that you can disagree with me if you want to.
I mean, do you... see, all the Doctors are different.
Yeah, they're all different.
There are different reasons.
People always ask who your favourite Doctor is.
And my favourite Doctor is Pat Troughton, but then that was the... I still think that, actually. But he was the one that I watched most as a child. I sort of didn't really pick up on William Hartnell, and I wasn't living in England, and I was a bit young for it. But Pat was the one I liked. And then actually, I don't know, I don't think John Pertwee would ever be one of my favourite Doctors, but in that way.
No.
I think he was a bit too south of England for me. I can't explain it. No, well, I come from the north, and there was a sort of homely quality about Pat Troughton and something, whereas John Pertwee was very much the sort of like posh Doctor, and I can't, a posh southern. So I would never have really sort of taken to him that much.
I have another question. Yeah.
How did you enjoy working on Parallel Towers and seeing it hanging?
Well, it was funny because it was quite an extensive audition process for it, because people always think, oh, you're a good friend of John's, he probably just gave you the part.
My audition process, I have to say.
And it was quite funny because I had to go along and meet the director, and I got on quite well with him, and then I got this call to say, oh, they'd like you to go and do an improvisation. Now, in Australia, you have to work really hard to get a part like a 4 lines. You have to do screen tests. They send you all sorts of scripts. But in England, it goes to the opposite extreme. And sometimes it's very frustrating because you go for a part and you think, I could play that character, but I haven't got the right frock on today, or I'm not wearing trousers. And they're going to look at me and think, no, she's not right for that part. And you never get a chance to actually act or get given a script, because they tend to just meet you and talk to you, and because there are so many actors in England, they don't actually ever want anybody to act. I know this sounds funny. They just want to cast somebody exactly as they are, because if you're not exactly the part, there are so many other people that they can just find somebody who is.
Can I just say something? We were having an interesting conversation in the car with Sarah, who was staying with. She was saying that, I mean, it's a thing we've come across very often in Australia, that when you see Australians portrayed in English productions, the accent is terrible. I'm here to tell you that it's always an Australian that plays it. There are plenty of Australian actors in England, and never, ever would anybody ever cast anybody who wasn't Australian in a production to play an Australian. So I'm afraid they're Aussie. So...
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't get cast as a person to play somebody from Liverpool if you weren't Liverpudlian. You wouldn't get cast. I mean, you just don't get cast as anything other than what you really are.
How many actors have we got in England?
Oh God, I mean, I don't know, but you just wouldn't.
Like 300,000. I mean, so there's plenty of choice.
Yes, but anyway, to go back to that, so I had to go and do this improvisation, and John was there, and the director Nick played the Doctor, and I had to play the Kang, and I just wondered, because we were in the offices at the sort of like BBC, and I just wondered what people thought. Listening from other rooms, because it was sort of like, get back, I'll shoot you, and all this sort of thing. And I think Nick, the director, he'd been a performer himself. He'd been a ballet dancer of all things, and I think he was quite enjoying his role as the Doctor. And then sort of I got through that bit, and I think that was all right. And then you see, this was where having John as a friend almost sort of like worked against me, because he then started saying, he was sort of like working out, and he's going, Julie, how old are you now? And I was thinking, I can't possibly, because you get sort of the thing in England, it's sort of like my agent, when you're with an agent for quite a while, you sort of seem to stay the same age in your agent's head as you were when you first joined. And also I always play sort of quite a bit younger than me, partly because I'm vocally very sort of young. I mean, the radio thing I did in Australia, I was playing about a 15 or 16-year-old on the radio. And all of a sudden you think, I can't lie to John. He knows how old I am. And I said, well, look, I'm 26, and if that's too old, you can sort of, that's it. You've got to take me or leave me, because you always get told to lie, or sort of, well, you do, don't you? You always get said, look, no, just lie. Say you're 19. Say you're 19. And you think, I can't possibly say I'm 19. But as it happens, I mean, it's just what you do in the performance, because at the end I was talking to the director and I said something about being 26. He said, you're not 26. And I said, yeah, I told you I was when I started. I'm a bit older than 26.
One of the most common questions I get asked is, how come somebody as old as you is playing a schoolboy? So,
in England, it's very different.
There you go.
In Australia, you have a lot of young stars, and people become very successful when they're about 19. Whereas in England, you take a series. I don't know whether you've seen Bread, but in Bread, there's the girl the one playing the daughter in that. I mean, she's in her 30s. I mean, in England, you're considered to be an extremely young person until you're about 35, and you do often get. It is often people in their 30s that are playing even 19-year-olds I've known. I mean, it's just, it's very, very frustrating. And then you come here and you think, in England you're thinking, I'm waiting. And then you get to Australia and you think, I've missed it.
It's absolutely true. Yeah. So I have another question. Yes. That must be me, yes. They're wonderful. It's absolutely great, because unlike the other monsters, they are efficient to work with. I don't know that it's a difficult problem with Doctor Who that the script people have these wonderful ideas and they never materialise into anything. When they come out of the costume design department, it is a problem. But the Daleks. Do you know how a Dalek actually works? I mean, physically, how a Dalek works. There's a man... no, all right, I'll tell you. Right. To anybody under the age of 2.5, they're real. And they'll come and get you if you don't go to bed early tonight. That's right, they've got full of green slime. Now, what a Dalek is it? I'll get up and demonstrate this. It's just anyway, I'll get up on here, right? Should I kick the water over? What? It's not very strong. It's making creaking noise. Okay, well, I'll just demonstrate. The bottom of a Dalek is about that high. They're smaller than you think they are. When they get the Daleks out, these 6 old men come out of the woodwork somewhere at the BBC, and they say, here come the Daleks, you see, and these 6 grey-haired old men come in. Midgets, that's right. And they get in these things like this, and they sit in them, and they've got wheels, and they paddle them around with their feet. And you never see them with their heads on. So all you're doing is there's this little man with grey hair and beard going, I will exterminate you. You know, get back, please. You know. And don't move so fast, I can't keep up with you. Come on, get back, and all this sort of thing when you're rehearsing. And so you think it's really quite cosy, there's these little grey-haired men following you around. But then they put the heads on, and you get the guys in who do the voices. And the guys who do the voices are extraordinary, because they will actually sit there without a mic or anything and go, I will exterminate. And it is a very frightening sound. They're wonderful at it. And so they put the hoods on, and suddenly you can't see the guy in there. And there's this extraordinary voice coming across. And because a different man is doing the voice to the movement, they can both concentrate on one thing or the other. So you can actually act with a Dalek, because you can improvise with a Dalek. If something goes wrong, the guy in the Dalek can move the Dalek to the right place and get it right, because he's not having to concentrate on saying anything. And the guy who's watching the screen in a different part of the studio can say something to cover it over. So it's great, and it's very frightening. They are really marvellous to work with. And a classic example of that is a story that I tell about the 5 Doctors, which is that there was a scene in it where the Hartnell Doctor was with his assistant, whose name temporarily escapes me. Carol Ann Ford played, what was the name of the assistant? Susan. And they're supposed to be running down this corridor, and the Dalek is supposed to intercept them and try and zap them, you see. And what happened was that off they ran, and the Dalek started off a bit late, this old guy, and he panicked and he started going a bit fast. And by the time he got to the point he needed to be, the Doctor and Susan had gone, and the scene was ruined, and the Dalek ploughed into the wall. And it was heard to say, "Shit, missed the buggers!" You know. Which is so it can be quite amusing working with the Daleks. It's quite nice. I mean, there are some horrendous stories. I mean, it leads me on to a thing that I quite like talking about, which is monsters. I mean, the incredibly frightening monsters in Paradise Towers are a classic example.
That's my question about whether I like working on Paradise Towers. I just remembered. I did enjoy working on Paradise Towers. One of the things is about being a Kang was that when you get the script, you think, oh gosh, what a hoot, all these funny words. And then by the time you got to the end of rehearsal, that's your sort of like language. So then when you get into the studio and the sort of like all the technical guys and things are there, and you say something like, what was it, taken to the cleaners. And when they all sort of like burst out laughing the way you did when you first read it, you sort of like look at them and you're completely offended because it's become your language, because you're sort of acting it. So it was quite good fun. Anyway, back to the monsters, because that's far more exciting.
About the monsters on.
Oh, well, they were ridiculous. But you get the script and you think, oh, that sounds quite good. And then you get these things, and there's sort of like the little men sort of like peddling in them. And I think the first one I saw was the one in the swimming pool. And I was imagining, when I read the script, I thought that'd be really good. And I was imagining sort of like a much darker sort of swimming pool, with lots of plants or something. And something creeping up and grabbing her. And then we got there, I saw that, and we just absolutely hooted. I mean, it was hysterical. It was extremely unfrightening. The thing about that swimming pool was, this is the day before we went out, we thought, oh, swimming pool location, be nice, be able to go for a quick swim at some point maybe. And then I heard the production manager talking. He's actually a friend, Ian Fraser, but he's a very short, portly gentleman, very portly, and he wouldn't feel the cold. So actually, and he started talking about swimming pools, and he said, well, we wanted the one at Heathrow Airport, but they wanted such and such an amount per day, just way out.
£15,
And then they wanted the Oasis in London or the Sanctuary, but they couldn't afford that. So in the end, they got stuck with this swimming pool that was it was Chalfont St Giles in a private house. I think it belonged to some Arabs, and they weren't actually living there. The toilet didn't work. I mean, like, there was a whole film crew there, and there wasn't a toilet working. And in fact, because they were forced to let us use this toilet that wasn't working properly, by the end of the day, they had sort of like water streaming down one of the walls. But the whole point about the swimming pool was that, I know this doesn't mean very much to an Australian, but in England, the thought of an unheated swimming pool is like deathly. I mean, in Australia, I will go in unheated swimming pools, but in England, you would never go in an unheated swimming pool. And poor little Bonnie, I mean, there's nothing to her. And I heard the production manager say, he said, the pool's not heated. I said, not heated? I said, you're joking. He said, no, it's not heated. And he obviously had never been for a swim in his life, but it doesn't make I suppose it doesn't make much sense to you, but in England, you just think, oh, no, I can't get in that. And it was absolutely freezing. I mean, I did feel sorry for her. But then the stunt girl had I mean, that was the thing as well. I thought the stunt girl looked so much bigger than Bonnie. I mean, did anybody notice that? There was this, on the underwater shots, I shouldn't say anything, I was spoiling it.
There's an interesting example of that in Julie's Paradise Towers. Was one of the wonderful things was where those marvellous reses, Brenda Bruce, they were going to be sucked into the waste disposal thing. Now you think that's great, and what happens is this silly claw comes out.
And there was a little man peddling it behind going, and this thing came out because it was supposed to. It would have been wonderful if something would have come up and grabbed them, but they couldn't actually suss that. They couldn't do it.
It is extraordinarily primitive. I've gone on to something else. The way that Doctor Who is made. The TARDIS screen, when that goes up, that's worked on a bicycle chain, which is wheeled up like that. And so all the sound is laid on afterwards. So when you're actually in the studio and the doctor says, let's see what's going on outside or something like that, it goes, and up it goes. And it goes up, and what do you hear? You hear, all that sound is completely laid on afterwards. You can actually, a sort of a trick that we used to play for fun, if we didn't particularly, if a visiting artist was being slightly more tedious than usual, was that if you're anywhere near the TARDIS console, you can put on the most horrendous noises. If you can get yourself on shot, then you start touching the TARDIS, they have to lay on noise. So somebody can be having this incredibly intimate, important scene, and you'll just be going in the background. And so when it actually gets played back, you get the people doing this rather intimate, important scene with a background noise of. So there are various tricks you can play with the TARDIS. It's terrible the things actors do to each other.
Doctor Who's a funny programme because, like most things you do, you're involved in scenes with 2 or 3 people. And so you get your camera shot, and I mean, a lot of people will say, look, just you never have to worry about trying to fight for a camera. But Doctor Who, there are so many people in the scenes that you have to fight for your camera shots. And I mean, I was a bit, because I knew all about it from Mark, I mean, I did things whereby there were bows to shoot the cleaners, that was it. And I managed to get, there were only 2 that worked, and I managed to get one that worked, and I wasn't supposed to be in a shot, so therefore I shot the cleaner, so therefore they had to give me a shot, and they also had to give me a line. Now it sounds really petty, but the rehearsal process can get quite boring, so you have to find ways of making it interesting, and one of the interesting ways is trying to get yourself many more shots than you know you've got, and finding places to stand. I mean, you have to work out if you're not actually in the bit of dialogue. I mean, it can go a bit over the top. And Mark got shouted at because he used to, like, there'd be a 2-shot, and he'd come and stand in the middle, hover in the background, and he used to get.
You get Turlough in the background. There's 2 people there, and there's Turlough ready.
But
classic Turlough shot.
But I mean, I was aware of doing. I mean, actually, when I watched it afterwards, some of the things that I did, I thought, oh God, you cheapskate, because I did a few of those things just to get yourself you can get yourself extra shots and make your part bigger. It's just.
Whereas when you work on something, I mean, I did a play called Looking Back for Channel 4 just before I left England. You might want to do exactly the opposite. There was a scene in a bar which was supposed to be quite a sort of, I was supposed to be a bit tense in it with some of my relatives, and I asked the director never to shoot my face in the scene, always to shoot me from behind. In fact, he didn't have the courage to do it, but it would have been much better if he had have done it like that. So it's just working on different programs or with different cameras. You want to do different things,
well,
but it is half the fun of Doctor Who is getting yourself on the camera shot.
Yeah, Doctor Who, you're not on the camera shot, you're not in it.
You're not in it, no. That's right, because you haven't got a character. So it's the thing I was going to say about that claw that came out was the only way that, and again, that reminded me of something that's very primitive. I don't know whether you remember, but in the one where we're on a ship, Enlightenment. The one you've just watched it, yes. There's a scene in which I'm sucked into this vortex, yeah? Right? Now, I don't know, I can't quite remember what that looks like, but how that was done was I shall demonstrate. You'll see it? They drew a circle on the ground in the studio, and I had to lie on the ground and then I did something to it. She was a case of, if I was on the ground like this, and there's the production manager there, and he says, action, and all you can do is constantly leaking out. That's it. So I'd just be lying on the floor, back with these The dog toy was great, but you know. That's all it is. It's a very different way of working. I shall, last time up, I shall do my party piece about monsters. Shall I do my party piece about monsters? That's a good idea, because you never know when or if I'll be in Melbourne ever again. So. No, the thing about the monsters was, it was coming on from that Daleks thing, was that the one I was going to talk about were the tractators. The Merker we don't talk about. The Merker was so bad as to... The Merker was the big thing in the Sea Devils, and for those of you that need reminding, which was lowered onto the two extremely skilled people who, I mean, seriously, they do a program called Rent-A-Ghost, and they play the horse in it, and they're the best in the business in the world at it. And they were hired to do this Doctor Who thing, and we did all these things in the studio, and the Merker was lowered, dripping still with paint, from the studio roof, and put onto them, and they completely collapsed under the weight of it. Why did we bother rehearsing for 2.5 weeks? And, you know, you have these scenes where the Merker's supposed to be chasing you down a corridor, and all the Merker can do with its front paw is... Well, that is it. That is the limitation of the Merker's movement. And so the Merker goes, and you go, "Keep away, get away, get." You do all this acting, and the Merker isn't moving in the slightest. So that was. But the Tractators were the classic example where it was quite a good idea. We had all these worm things. And I thought it was quite a strong story. And we worked with a group of black dancers, black male dancers, robotic dancers, and they were wonderful. And we did all these things with them, twining themselves around us, and it was going to look really good. And we got into the studio, and they got into their costumes, and these very well paid, highly respected black robotic dancers who we'd worked with for 2.5 weeks could do this. And that was the entire limit of their movement. Not only that, they did have a problem. They couldn't breathe, which is unfortunately a problem for humanoid life forces. So we had to get 6 other humanoid life forces with oxygen bottles and rubber tubes to stick up the bottom of them. Every time. It's a common problem in Doctor Who, not being able to breathe, yes. And the other thing was that the costume designer on that occasion had not got together with the set designer. So you will notice that a Tractator never goes through a door because they were too high to go through the doors. They couldn't actually go through a door, so he had to completely re-block it. So you got a few problems with the old monsters when you get in there, to say the least. Anyway, what are you going to say? Another question? Yes. No, he's been like, oh right, sorry.
Are there any Australian shows we'd like? Well.
Neighbours? No. I'd love to perform in Neighbours. What people don't understand about acting is that it is a job. And it is very, very difficult to earn a living unless you're in a regular series. I mean, it's almost, especially in Australia. I mean, it is quite shocking how much actors are paid all over the world. I'm about to do, I mean, I may do it. I've been offered it. I mean, I just think I should perhaps make a stand about the money. But I've been offered a part in a thing called Cassidy, which is a new series, which I'm not supposed to talk about, but is actually about an Australian politician who spills the beans about corruption. Of course, it's entirely fictional. And they haven't got many to choose from, as you might imagine. But I've been offered for the week and for a complete sale all over the world and built-in repeats $400. The minimum is $260. That's negotiated. That is how much actors are paid in this country. So unless you are on a series, which is why, you know, when you laugh when you say Neighbours, but I've got to earn a living. You get to my age, I'm 30 almost. I mean, it's not a hobby acting. It would be nice to earn a living. For my complete years on Doctor Who, I earned, including everything, I think the year I worked for the BBC, almost 52 weeks of the year, I earned, I'll tell you in dollars, $24,000. And that was the best year I ever had. It is a situation where actors' wages haven't moved in 10 years. I don't quite understand why. I was paid more for my first TV job than I've ever been paid since.
The thing is, you've got all it's not just doing the job, you've got all the effort, you've got all your publicity, you've got to get a job, it often takes about 3 weeks anyway, because you've got to go to an initial casting, you've got to go to something else and something else. And so sometimes people think things can sound a lot of money for one day, but that's your money that you've earned that month or whatever. I mean, it's just not, and that's never taken into consideration. And also there's the thing that somebody is making a lot of money out of selling television programs all over the world, and it certainly isn't the actors, apart from a very, very few exceptions. And apart from America, and I mean, America's just completely different anyway. I mean, people do.
Just so interesting. I mean, I don't mind talking about money. I mean, for my complete Doctor Who sold to Australia, I think I earned just over $1,000, complete payment forever.
Well, I was in a series called Everdell Farm, which I sold 40 episodes to. They sold 40 episodes of mine to New Zealand, and all right, there aren't many people in New Zealand, but that is 20 hours television, and I got about $100 for it. Now, conceivably, I could go to New Zealand and somebody could know who I was. And then it seems that television is very much a part of people's lives, and people have an acceptance of sitting there and watching actors. And actually, they're not being paid as much as they should be for what the input, because if you think about the amount of television people watch, and well, it's just extraordinary, really. And there's always this sort of image that actors are profligate because they're obviously earning so much money. And actually the reason they sort of drive around in battered up old cars and don't have much money is because not that they've spent it, but because they've never earned it, apart from a very, very few exceptions, and apart from a lot of American actors.
Julie and I were both in an episode of a series called Strike It Rich in England, which was a programme about high-flying business people. And the cast who were playing this the car park looked like a scrap metal dump. Yeah, it was quite extraordinary.
Car parks for television rehearsal rooms always look like scrap metal dumps, don't they? If there are any cars parked there and people haven't had to come on public transport.
Or bicycle, as Sylvester travels by. Yeah, so it's interesting. So any Australian programmes we'd like to work on? I think the thing is about you want to work, but obviously it's nice to do good work. I think the thing is, it's always the part. If you can get a part that is, people say, what's your ideal part? It's the part that is as similar to you as you can get, because then you become what is called a personality actor. It's never happened to me. It happened to Pete with Tristram. It was a part that made him, because that's Peter. Now, to get a part which is Mark or is Julie is so wonderful. Because you can just relax and you can act. Rafferty's Rules is superb, I think. Yeah, it's great.
Some of the later ones, I haven't been watching the repeats. But
Home and Away is very good, I think, for a soap. I rate Home and Away. It's got a sense of humour, and I think it's the best soap.
We don't actually, I mean, we're terrible, we don't actually watch very much television, and we go through phases where we don't even have a television for months on end.
It's not exactly restful for us to watch television.
So then what we tend to do is sort of like sit down and watch lots and lots of it, and watch all the sorts of different things, soaps and series, and then we shut the television up and don't watch it again for ages and ages, because for a lot of people it's very relaxing to sort of like sit and watch the television, but for us it's like doing your homework. And if we watch a lot of television, I find that I just get exhausted, because I feel as if my brain's been thinking about similar sorts of things. I'm sort of thinking about, at the moment, we've been sitting down and we've been watching soaps and thinking how they could conceivably introduce a POM into the soap, because but as far as we're concerned, we meet English people all the time in Australia, and we're not actually represented in any of the programmes. And one reason maybe you can say is that of all the professions, that actors aren't normally allowed to emigrate. I think we were just very, very lucky. But we were very, very lucky. So of course there isn't a pool of English actors here to choose from to say, oh well, we will have an English actor in that. So we thought we should sit and watch the soaps, and then we sort of like wrote a letter. Probably nothing will come of it, but we felt we should write a letter to the people that wrote and produced all the different soaps and say, this is what we think. They can bring a Chilean refugee into Flying Doctors. No, it wasn't Flying Doctors. It was Country Practice, because it was funny. We'd just been to see the casting lady on a Country Practice. She was an extremely negative woman about, and say, her sort of basic starting out point was, you'll never learn an Australian accent. Nobody ever does. Even Meryl Streep can't learn an Australian accent. And I'm not a big fan of Meryl Streep, but I've met a lot of Australians who thought it was very good. I thought it varied. Sometimes it was good, and sometimes I thought maybe it was the stage in the filming they were at. Some of the stuff she did earlier on, it was terrible, and then other stuff, it was better. But I thought it was a bit sort of high-handed of this lady to say she thought it was absolutely dreadful. She said that nobody could learn an Australian accent. And then she said that there was no way they'd ever have anybody English in a country practice. So why? She'd asked to meet us. I do not know. It was just... So, and we actually took that away and thought about it and thought, actually, there are so many English people here. We hear English voices a lot of the time. And we're not represented.
It's an interesting thing. I mean, I can understand in Australia the sort of antipathy against England. I mean, obviously we left England, so we can't particularly be in love with it. One of the things I hate about England, again, it's another thing we're talking about in the car, is royalty. I mean, the sooner the better Australian gets the English royal family off their backs, I will be very, very happy. I've come here to escape that ruddy system, in which there's enormous privilege and wealth in England and terrible poverty. More so than in Australia, although you have your Aborigine problem. But that's a different problem altogether. That's a cultural problem, amongst other things. There isn't a cultural problem in England. It's just rich and poor. And the rich are incredibly rich, where you get privileged and non-privileged people in England. And I don't think unless you live in England or stay there for some time, you will realise what immense wealth and power the royal family have, and why. But that's my political standpoint on that. So, good old Australia, get rid of them as far as I'm concerned. I think it's 200 years, you've grown up enough, you can become a country on your own right, and I'm looking forward to being one of you. Okay, is that somebody trying to assassinate me? Prince Charles, Lady Di sympathiser in the audience. So there's that side to that as well, isn't there? I can't remember what I was talking about.
Well, sometimes we feel that people think that just because you're English...
You are privileged.
That you must, you're privileged in some way. I don't know.
You're posh. Well, there's a lot of Poms that ain't posh, and there's a lot of them in
Australia. But then there's another side to that I came to Australia and I thought, at last we'll be away from all that sort of class. I mean, I come from the north of England, so you get a basic disadvantage as a start off, because you could be the most wealthy person in the universe, but if you came from the north of England, you'd still be common as muck as far as in the south. I mean, I was trying to explain this this morning, that in the north of England, there are people who possibly went to a private school or have some sort of money. Now, when those people are portrayed on the television in England, the people who make the television programmes hire somebody from the south who went to public school from the south. I mean, there's no such thing as a posh northerner. So
we were hoping to get away from this in Australia.
And it's like, I went to school with people, I could have been a doctor, I went to school with people who were doctors who have much broader accents than I've got, and they've been barristers, solicitors, doctors. Fine. Now, when you get to television in England, it doesn't, even if the series is set in the north, or Wales, or anywhere, when they hire the doctor, the solicitor, or the barrister, they hire somebody who is from the south of England who went to private school. And it's sort of an insidious way of maintaining the status quo in England, to confirm actually that you have to be privileged to be intelligent, to have money, to be glamorous in any way. And that is very insidious to English society. And maybe being an actor, you become very, very aware of that sort of manipulation that goes on. And I don't know whether it's conscious by anyone, it's just that the television companies are all run by people from the south of England who went to private school. And it's just, that is it. And so actually coming to Australia, I thought, we'll get away from this. But it's funny, I've got, my agent in Sydney is supposed to be like one of the best agents in Australia. And she's got Sigrid Thornton, and it's quite a... But her criticism of my voice is they don't really know what they don't quite think's right about my voice. But I can say it's certainly not because it's English. It's because it's not upper class English. And that what they can hear is my northern accent. And I've told them that because they couldn't understand what it was. They kept saying, oh, you sound so English. And then they want you to emulate Australian people who sound so English but sound so Australian upper class. Do you see?
It's quite weird. What we're being asked to do by our agents is impersonate Australian people doing an English accent. Because we don't sound like the English accent they've heard. I mean, I don't talk like that, and that is actually the English accent which they want to talk, which they want you to talk in, because I suppose it's all over the world. And so if you then take that into Australian, and they put a bit of Australian, I mean, I can't do it, but there are Australian actors in particular who speak with almost an English accent, but with a tinge of Australian. So that's what we're being asked to do. We're being asked to forget what class we came from, forget our complete history as people, but just impersonate Australians doing an English accent, which I refuse to do. I mean, in the end, I think what Julie and I are going to do is, you know, I mean, we got dribs and drabs of work coming in anyway, and that's fine. In fact, talking about this earlier, there was a series in Brisbane being set up with me as the lead, which has got pre-sale to the BBC at the moment. So that means hopefully it'll go, and it's got the writers working on it. It's been going on for some time. But so we'll see what happens on that one. But if it doesn't, I mean, I think Julie and I are just going to sod off in a van and go fruit picking for 2 years, and come back as true blue Aussies and forget about the fact we were ever English, you know. Because I'm not doing that lark of talking like that. It's not bloody well me, you know.
Sort of like agents, they don't want you to learn an Australian accent. They don't want you to, which seems to me, for the sort of characters I'd like to play, I'd like to have an Australian accent. But no, they don't want you to do that. They want you to learn, as I say, this upper-class accent.
Okay. Yes.
Why did you leave Doctor Who?
I left Doctor Who because they weren't spending enough money on it. It's the reason why Peter left and why Janet left as well. We were being asked to work too hard. The product was becoming not very good. And I mistakenly thought that I would, because I was young, I mistakenly thought that I would leave and the world would be at my feet. It didn't, and it wasn't. But yeah, I left because I wasn't happy doing my job, is the answer. Which is the best reason for leaving any job, I reckon. If you stopped enjoying it, then I think that communicates through to other people. So, there. Right. Another question. Yes. Have I had any bad problems with people seeing me as Turlough instead of Mark Strickson since my time leaving Doctor Who? Yes, I mean, a lot of Doctor Who assistants just bomb and never work again because you were associated with that. I haven't done that, and I've been very lucky, and I'm very grateful to that. But, yes, it is a problem. You become so identifiable. I mean, for a start, everybody in the business thought I had bright red hair. I thought I was a little, you know, whatever. So, yes, I did have a problem for a while. I don't quite know how I got out of it. I think I grew my hair long. And another problem as an actor is, of course, people don't know you're out of work because the series is shown 9 months after you've made it. It stops being shown, so people think you're still working. They think you're still playing Turlough. Even if they're in the business, they cannot get it through that you're not actually doing it now. It's very funny. My great-aunt Violet, who is ancient, she's about 80, what is she now? She lies about her age. She's been 80-something for... Anyway. Anyway, she is 86 now. And she'd bring me up when I was Doctor Who, and she'd say, "Oh, I thought you looked terrible last week, Mark. Are you all right? You know, are you feeling well?" And it was made, 6 months ago. But yes, yes, I did have a problem immediately afterwards, but I don't think anybody thinks of me as Turlough anymore, or I hope they don't anyway.
You also because people never really sort of, I think not so much Mark because he wasn't on it for very long, and also he looks so different from what he really looks like, but I think people get a bit stuck because people see them how they sort of looked in Doctor Who, and they do articles,
It's not easy to cast me in a sort of a soap with bright hair and eyebrows
but
glued
there
on.
are constantly, in the British press, there
Mascara.
will always be sort of like articles about Doctor Who, and then they'll occasionally show some of the repeats.
I mean, just since we've been in Australia, I sent a big thing from Radio Times with me in the middle of it as Turlough.
And it's a funny thing, it's somebody like Katie. I know Katie feels like she hasn't lived in England for a very long time, and she's saying, sort of agents said, "Oh, you'd be new again if you came back." But the fact is she wouldn't, because you see, everybody knows from Doctor Who, and I always think it must be awful for people to sort of like constantly have something to measure by how old you're getting all the time, because they haven't seen you slowly get older. They have this sort of glut, and it's repeated quite a lot, of this sort of like image of this Doctor Who companion.
Suddenly Turlough's father walks in the office.
Yeah, and I think they don't sort of ever. It's funny, I suppose it's a bit like being Peter Pan or something. People don't, because it's all, when they do the sort of like 20 years, the one you did, was it the 20th anniversary?
The 5 Doctors.
The 5 Doctors, and it's sort of like the Doctors. It doesn't matter that the Doctors have got a bit older, or it doesn't seem to matter. Maybe they'll notice.
But the assistants are always jumping around in tutus or kilts.
I I mean, sort of like, and Carol Ann Ford, I mean, it just doesn't look right. It looks quite funny, doesn't it? I mean,
Another question. Yes. My answer to this is I'm afraid they keep them in. When you do things in America, the Star Trek people say, why don't you do a film of Doctor Who bloopers? Because they do a film of Star Trek bloopers, which is very popular at conventions. And the answer is they are kept in. I mean, when I was working on Doctor Who, we were basically working on one take. You got it right. And if you didn't get it right, then you just laid on something to make it right. And there are two little stories about this. One is Jeff Rawle, who in Tractators played the young prince sort of character in it. And I said to Jeff, look, if something goes wrong, just keep going. And he was walking down these steps. I can't remember what the scene was. And one of the steps, he put his foot through it. So he was walking down and he went... and he kept going and he did the scene. And so production manager goes, on we go! And Jeff said, excuse me, but I don't know whether anybody noticed. Can you hear me up in the box? You know, I don't know whether anybody noticed, but I put my foot through one of the steps as I was walking down. And he comes down from the box and he says, you know, it's all this muttering on. And the production manager says, don't worry, they're going to lay something over, Jeff. Look fine up there. On we go. You know. And another one about that was, I think it was again in the Tractators story, where Peter, Janet, and I ran out from a cave, and there was supposed to be an explosion. And what it was I think, it looks like a cement mixer full of bits of cork which blows out over the front of the camera, so it looks like an explosion. There's no actual noise at the time that's laid on. So anyway, we run out, expecting an explosion, nothing happens. So we go, and the production manager goes, on we go! And Pete said, oh look, there was no explosion. Oh, don't worry, we'll lay something over, look fine to them up in the box, on we go! So you're left with three actors who look as if they are terrible actors, you know, dripping with egg on their faces, who've just come out and done that. And that is it, and there's no chance to do it again. It is another reason I left Doctor Who.
That sort of thing often comes from being in a very sort of like relaxed working environment. I mean, with Doctor Who, you're absolutely terrified of doing... I mean, the thing like Richard dying in Paradise Towers, I mean, we corpsed through all the rehearsals of him. Well, not when he died. You know, when he got zapped by the thing and he went, nah! And we were sort of going... and we were... But when it...
Well, I'll tell you the lovely story. My impression of Richard is lovely, right? He's one of our most famous comedy actors, right? And he's great. I mean, he's the best comedy actor we've got. Watch Richard walking across the room, and you just fall about with laughter. Something about his body is just hilarious. And he usually wanders around in a little cardigan, you know, the figure that you've seen on that series where they play the two lots of neighbours, right? That's Richard. And he wanders around with this little cardigan, you know, his hands in his pocket. And there was that scene where he was walking forward to become, when we had the
put over him, yeah.
Yeah, and he had, and the monster had caught him by the arm where he was about to become dragon. And so, you know, Richard would walk around like this, and then they'd say, production manager would say, okay, Richard, you ready to go for one? And Richard would, yeah, I'm okay, yeah. All right, yes, fine, okay. And the production manager would say, action, and Richard would go, and I had an American guy with me, and we were up in the box.
No, it wasn't. It's Swiss. He'd never ever seen.
He'd never seen Doctor Who.
He'd never seen Richard.
And he was falling. So funny.
But you get to the point, because we laughed all the time at him, but you get terrified of laughing. But so Richard, he doesn't. He can be a very good actor. He doesn't know, but he doesn't. He can't not be funny. It's very difficult for him.
When he was dying,
because I said to him, I said Richard, that's not what he's getting. I said it's
would
not
come down
scary.
And Richard would go.
He'd go.
You know,
ah! And you just.
He'd say, how did that sound?
And I said, Richard, it's ridiculous. It's just not. It's not scary. It doesn't sound as if you're in agony. It's just, but the way they tried to get around it was because they hired Richard, and then they actually, in a way, sort of wanted him to do something he couldn't do because they didn't like him being so funny. And I mean, he was a joy to work with because every time he did something, it was funny. It's sort of like the two Rezzies. I mean, they're both very good actresses, and I thought the end product was very, very good. But actually to work with, it's not anything like as amusing, because the first time you see them do it, you think, oh, that was funny.
And you do the same thing again and again and again.
And it's not particularly amusing anymore, but Richard was always funny, and I think John, the producer, he got a bit worried about him being so hilarious, and he tried to make him not so funny, but the only way they could really get round it in the end was they tried to do the shots as tight as possible so you didn't see his body, because his body is the thing that you just fall about laughing at all the time. Nobody could do a scene with him without falling about laughing. I say, but the thing about Doctor Who is you can't afford to do that on the tape, because, you know, if I corpse, they'll keep it in, and it will just be me that looks stupid. So I mean, you really, I mean, the point is, when it came to that, I thought, this is a really dangerous moment because I'm going to laugh. And you just have to really bite your lip and concentrate as hard as possible. I can't laugh, I can't find this funny. Which is a sort of a different situation. It's like when I did a radio play here, and there was one scene that I can't remember why it was funny, but we couldn't do it. We just got to the, I mean, it can happen in rehearsal sometimes, sort of in theatre more so than television, where you get to a certain point and you just burst out laughing. And we could do that in the radio. There was enough time, but you can't in a television studio. On something like Doctor Who, you just can't do that. I mean,
we were always running out of time when I was in it, and one of the lovely things that happened, was in the Sea Devils story. We got to the end of the studio, about 5 minutes to the end of the studio, and they realised they hadn't got enough shots. They had got hardly any shots of the Sea Devils dying, and there were complete bits of the story that needed this, with all smoke in the passageways and whatever, and they hadn't got them. They'd forgotten to do them. Now, you can imagine how much it costs to set up another studio. So these guys got into their costumes as best they could, and it was in fact Ian Fraser, this very chubby, very short friend of ours, who was production manager, and he was going, okay, come on, get into place, okay, now die, get up, die, get up, and it's a manic studio, because what happens at 10 o'clock at the BBC is somebody pulls the plug out. They pull a plug out, and the studio is dark. And then the lights come up, fluorescent lights come up, and say, okay. And if you haven't got it done by then, you haven't got it done. And that happened in my last story, Planet of Fire, the scene where I'm supposed to be talking to whoever on my planet. But Jonathan and I were in there, and I put the thing in the ruined spaceship, and I say, Visional Turlough 37, reporting for duty, and whatever. That was a scene that lasted about 45 seconds. We only had about 27 seconds of studio time left. And the director said, just get the plot in, go. And we just had to cut it as we went, and just make sure we finished the scene in 27 seconds. Because after 27 seconds, plug came out. So, there you go. That's how Doctor Who was made when I was on it. Another question. Yes. Well, I actually thought of Turlough. I thought Turlough was a bit of a shit. He's a very two-dimensional character. If I had to say, was that he was just two-dimensional evil character. If I had a criticism of Eric's writing, who was the script editor when I was on Doctor Who, it is that there was no humour. I wanted humour, and I never got it as Turlough. He's just a flat, unattractive character, I felt. And I don't think Turlough worked particularly well. I think he worked fine in the first 8 episodes, but after that, I just think he got lost because of that. Because he was, I think, a two-dimensional character. That was the problem. Just stuck out like a sore thumb. So that's really what I felt about him. He didn't sit happily on me really, as a part. But had a nice time some of the time. Yes, lady at the back, and then we'll work around. That's no. Well, they wrote this book, you see, Turlough and the Earthling Dilemma. It's very difficult to write. They wrote that book because he was the easiest character to take out, and it was a pilot novel. It did reasonably well. I know Tony was trying to sell it as an idea to have this series with Turlough, but the very fact is you cannot have, this is the problem with the Doctor. I think the Doctor's writing needs to have an enormous sense of humour. And why I love Pat as the Doctor, and Pete should have had a much more rounded, funnier, softer character, I think, the sort of actor Pete is, with humour. Because it's very short on humour when I was in it. And who is going to make a series about a character like Turlough, who is just so unattractive? If you thought of all the people on television, you wouldn't think, hey, I'd really like to go out with Turlough for a drink and a nice romantic dinner, and I bet we'd have a real giggle, and go on somewhere nice after. No, Turlough, it just, I didn't feel that many people would feel that about Turlough, and I suppose that was the weakness of it. So there. I, like most of the people in A Christmas Carol, didn't work with George C. Scott. I have never seen the film until about 2 weeks ago. I did a film of A Christmas Carol, right, where George C. Scott played Scrooge and I played the young Scrooge in it. I thought it was not a very good film. Clive, I think, is a lovely man who directed it, and he is. He's a sweet man, but he was a big director in the 60s with What's New Pussycat and things, and it just reeks of the 60s to me, A Christmas Carol. Very flat sort of way of filming.
Also the fact that he tried to, it was tried to do like a sort of like large-scale sort of movie, and you got sort of scenes with lots and lots of people. Like, where were they? They were like in the stock exchange. And I found it really eerie because the fact was they had extras, and extras aren't allowed to speak. And they'd lined up all these shots with people walking in front of the camera. And the stock exchange would have been an incredibly noisy place. And none of these people were allowed to speak. It was most peculiar, most odd. Did you notice that? That sort of thing with extras. Large crowd scenes with people not allowed to sort of make any noises. You're allowed to make general noises, aren't you? But you've got to start paying people different rates if they're doing set lines. And he wanted to make it atmospheric and have people sort of like walking in front. But you can't have people that close and not have them saying something that is distinctly vocal and understood.
So I suppose in answer to your question, one, I was quite happy with my performance in it. I thought I was quite good in it. So I was quite relieved by that, having never seen it before. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought that was good. I was surprised, because it wasn't...
Thank you very much.
It's because I knew that... Because I started watching the film, and I hated it.
If you watch it, Frank only does that extraordinarily bad performance as well.
And it's got all these sort of like very prestigious English actors in it, making absolute idiots of themselves.
I thought I came away quite
George,
cleanly.
because at the beginning Mark said, "Oh, I don't," because working on it, George kept himself very much to himself. He's a bit grand.
Baseball in his caravan. Yeah,
doesn't really has a stand-in.
He's casting John Gielgud in a western.
And doesn't really and the thing is, I think Americans might quite like it because in a way the only person who came out of it really well most of the time was him, because it was this person who looked totally unlike Scrooge. He was a big, powerful man. You didn't believe that he sat there eating sort of bowls of gruel for his supper. And you got all these sort of little English actors doing these extraordinary performances, and this sort of American sort of sitting there, this big American, being completely unfrightened. I mean, his lines were saying he was frightened, but most of the time he was being quite sort of amusing. And in a way, it was awful, but it sort of came out of it as the American coming out of it quite well. And then we got to Mark's bit, and I actually thought that Mark was very good. I actually started watching it, because I'd got really sort of teed at the rest of it. We haven't actually watched the end yet, have we?
I've had enough, really, by that one. Yeah. Thank you. I'm very kind, very grateful. George had no sense of humour either. When we finished working on the film, George had to fly back, you see. And he threw this party, which we had, I think, about 3 bottles of champagne and 2 pieces of salmon on 1 piece of toast. And I said to George, George, don't worry, if I ever need an older version of me again, I'll get in touch. And he just, didn't even register that I was making a joke.
He just didn't know what to say. He wasn't angry. He just decided not to hear it. Do you know what I mean? Because he didn't quite register what sort of reaction you could possibly have to a comment like that. And he couldn't imagine that anybody could possibly have said it. His ears must have been playing tricks on him.
The American actors are wonderfully grand. I mean, all English actors, whoever they are, just get in, have, natter to each other, have a meal, all have lunch together. English actors American actors have to have their Winnebagos, and they sit in, total solitude in their Winnebagos, looking at their scripts, and it's, because it's a very important job acting. It is saving the universe. And you get into Ronald Reagan if you do that. I mean, they honestly think American actors, they are important people doing a valuable job. I mean, I think that acting is like plumbing or being a garage mechanic or whatever. I can't mend my car, so I pay somebody to do it. And that's their job, and I respect them for it, and they're very skilled at it. And I hope people respect me for my skill, but I don't actually think being an actor is any more important than being anything else. Just the way I look at it. You say that to an American actor. Oh.
In England, you'll find that it isn't the actors that... Sometimes actors get a bit like that, but I think sometimes on production sides, and it's something that always worries me about our business. I was reading actually an article in your TV Week a few weeks ago about the filming of the film The Twilight Zone, and about, did anybody read it, about the people who died, and that sort of risk that goes on because that was completely unnecessary. That should never have happened, and that was that stupid director thinking that what he was making was actually so important. And you get this, the soap that I worked on in England, after I left, there was a little boy in it who was about, and I think it's always very iffy with small children, and he was, I think, 2 or 3 at the most at the time, and they wanted to do a shot of him being sort of not run over, but pushed into the ditch, he and his mother, by somebody coming along very fast in a Land Rover. Now, he was 3. They wouldn't tell him that this was a joke, that this wasn't real, because they said he'd spoil the shot and he might say something. So, I think the actress playing his mother, she was very upset about it, but I think she should have made a stand, because, the little boy's mother sitting on the sidelines wouldn't. And they did it once, and he was very upset. He was sort of, as far as he was concerned, he'd nearly been run over. And then sort of like the actress said, no, I'm not going to do it again. And they came, and they said, no, it's all right, it's okay. We just want you to come back and stand in. And then they did it again. And he just got into an absolute state. And the thing was, it backfired on them, because ever after that, because they hadn't actually told him that this was not real and that it was going to happen, the actor who was playing the person who was in the Land Rover, he just got this real thing about. And in the middle of scenes on the television, he'd say, I hate that such and such a body. Just like really, he went all quiet and subdued. And I think that's that sort of thing that happens is an extension of thinking that it's really important. It's, it's not. It's just...
Accidents very rarely do happen. I'll tell you sort of happened to me in Doctor Who, where I had an accident, extremely painful one, just that in the scene in Enlightenment, what you have just seen, where I throw myself off the ship, there's a company called Kirby Wire. Now, I'm trained to do stunts, and I said I would do my own stunts. For what it's worth, I'm associated with the British Society of Fire Directors. And so I said I'd do this. But irrespective of who you are as a stuntman, Kirby Wire are the insured party, and they attach the thing round you. Now, you know how to use it, but they take the risk of that being put on right. It's a quite sophisticated thing. It's made of leather, and it looks a bit like a pair of underpants. And I threw myself off the ship, and half the thing came apart. And so I completely wrenched my left-hand side of my groin. So when you see that look of pain on my face, I thought my day had come. That was it. My days were numbered as yes. My future as an international sex symbol was over, if it had ever started. But yes, that was you may notice if you actually look at that episode, or the few episodes filmed around there, Turlough isn't moving very fast in some of the scenes. He's moving very slowly, if moving at all. It took a long time to get better. Yeah, another question, yes. My favourite story was the first one, right, because I had more lines in it. It's not a silly thing to say. The smaller your part, the more difficult it is to do. Because you imagine, you're sitting in a studio, you're sitting in a room. Now, you get nervous, of course you do. It's part of the positive thing about acting. But if you've got one line to do, then you're in a constant state of nerves. You're getting a tiz about you doing your one line. And you go into the studio and you're very tense. Now, if you've got a part which has got lots of lines, you can go into the studio, get rid of all your tensions in one scene, which is fitted into all the others, and be relaxed the rest of the day. So people probably won't even notice that scene you were a bit tense in and weren't relaxed in. So the more lines you've got, the easier it is to be good. It is in direct proportion, for the most part. So that's why. BBC strike. The BBC are always on strike. I mean, the BBC are always on strike because
They're very bad industrial relations.
they have very bad industrial relations. Yeah, it's basically it's. I mean, what else can I say? Yeah, but it never comes to anything, does it?
They have stupid. The BBC, it's very archaic, and they have silly sort of rules about working practices. Like, because television used to be live, they have a studio day which starts at 2 in the afternoon. You're not supposed to have record until 2 in the afternoon, which goes on till 10 at night. Now, none of the other television companies in England have that.
TV companies record 9 till 5.
You know, sensible, civilised. Occasionally they'll get record in the morning as well. But I just think all their sort of like silly, archaic little rules make... they do... I mean, nothing's ever changed, and they just have very bad industrial relations. So
That's what that's about. Another question. Yes. What, the character of Tegan? I thought the character of Tegan was actually quite a good character because she did have a sense of humour. Partly through being Australian, they were able to sort of use that. Janet herself has got a sense of humour, although I'm not sure that really helps you in Doctor Who. They wanted to write the character with a sense of humour. I thought it worked very well as a character, I felt, and I thought Janet was very good at it. No, not really, no. Was Janet overpowering to my character, Tegan? No, I mean, no, she was doing a different thing, you see. She had a good relationship with the Doctor, and I could never have that, for fairly obvious reasons, perhaps. One of the things that did used to happen is Janet quite rightly is very concerned about the way that women are portrayed in television programmes. So if there was a line in which she felt that women were being put down in any way or being, you know, portrayed as a female role, she would say, I don't think I can say this line, which was often my reply would be, okay, I'll say it, you have my line. Which I did on many, many occasions. I took the line. But there are different ways of saying a line, right? This is a problem I had terribly with working with Peter, because I did get into a state where Turlough was just doing nothing, right? So, in order that, if you accept that Turlough was brought in with a brain, you can't suddenly stop having a brain. You can't suddenly say, what's that on the screen, Doctor? Because, I mean, good God, the guy's come in his own spaceship. He's got a brain. He's been fiddling around with the TARDIS, admittedly, terminally, stupidly. But, so he can't say, what's that on the screen, Doctor? So you change what's that on the screen, Doctor, to the assumption that you know what it is. What's that on the screen, Doctor? Right? Can you see the difference? That is assuming I know what is on the screen. Now that's a problem. You've got two doctors all of a sudden.
Well, I think from watching it that, I mean, Janet's Tegan as a character was much better after Nyssa went, because I think there was the two. I mean, there's a classic scene in Mordred Undead where you just think, oh, it's just
they
so...
bring the two
they bring the cane chairs in and sit down and have a natter. And it's just, I mean, it's awful, that sort of like womanly sort of thing, the two little, you know, little girls sitting there. And I think that actually, although I think John was a bit worried because he said, you know, we've got 3 doctors, because they were all such strong characters, that actually they all sort of had something to work off. Because I think the thing for Tegan, when Nyssa was there, was that they used to have these sort of like information scenes, didn't they, where they had to sort of like fill in background information,
That's right,
talking to each other, which is extremely tedious.
The interesting thing about that is that for some reason, which I'm not prepared, I'm not even going to try and work out, that when Pete, Janet and I were on it, it was at its most popular it had been for many years in England. Now, I don't know why that was, that whether or not it was that there were enough young people out there identifying with my character and enough as Tegan. But it did happen, and then the ratings dropped again.
I think the thing about Doctor Who is it's such a British institution, and it's like everybody gets very excited when people say they're going to get rid of it. And even people who never watch it, and I mean, most people don't ever watch it. I think the thing about when Peter and Janet and Mark, even though in some ways the budget on it wasn't very good and the stories didn't always hang together very well, I think that actually, if you were just casually turning on the television, that there was enough drama going on.
I mean, to
between
be honest, Peter's quite handsome as well. I mean, Peter's very watchable. Janet's very pretty. I'm quite good looking. People want to watch that. They're much more likely to keep the television on. It's a fact of life. They're much more likely to keep the television on that channel, right, if you've got Pete playing the lead than Sylvester, right? Because that's the way we work. That's what the whole of what television is about. It's about images of beautiful people. And whether or not you like that as a theory, it does work, which is why it was so popular, I think, Doctor Who, where you had a really pretty girl playing the assistant and a zany doctor. You've got the best of both worlds. You've got something for everybody. Well, not everybody, but you're covering a pretty good proportion, aren't you?
Well, I think it's the sort of like fatherly image, isn't it, with some of the and also because there's a sort of attractiveness of personality there as well. I don't know.
Another question. Let's get to yes. What's the worst blunder that ever happened? Technically the worst blunder is perhaps you all know this story, that in the one in King's Demons, where the cart brings Janet dressed as the May Queen to the front of the church.
King's Demons?
King's Demons?
No, it's the one with the round head.
One with the round head, Awakening. Yeah, the cart brings Janet to there, and we hired these horses, and they were all from riding school. The riding school horses have a leader, and the other horses follow that one, and they hadn't worked this out. And so the other horses went under the arch, and the leader was not attached to the cart. That was one of the ones that used to follow the leader, and he followed the others up the aisle, and he completely wrecked the set. Completely wrecked the cart, the door, the gate, the lot. And just you saw this, the end of the shot was this cart with Janet looking extremely dishevelled in it, with a completely wrecked church lichgate, just dragging debris up through the tombstone, following up to the other horses. So that was technically by far the worst thing that happened, because we could never rebuild it. It's another interesting one in that, and that would be quite a funny outtake, is the scene in that where I burst through, I burst through the door. You know, I'm in that little stable bit with the old guy, and I burst through the door. So they told me they'd taken this door, you know, loosened it off its hinges and everything. So you go, action, and I'm going like, I hurl myself at the door. How do you think it doesn't move? And you hear these noises, and you can see the door bending, and it won't move. It goes on for about 20 seconds, so the production manager goes, cut! So, and then they loosened it far too much, so that when I came out, the actual time on the shot, I had to shoot through the door. And so we had quite a few funny things happen on that. I'm losing my voice. I'm not used to talking, actually. We don't talk very much, do we? No. Julie, I'm very tired as well, yeah. Julie and I, because we don't know many people in Australia, are very, very isolated at the moment, and we can go, if we don't go into Sydney and actually see people in the business, two weeks without seeing anybody. So yeah, to be honest, it is quite extraordinary actually doing some talking, so concentrated talking. I started to lose my voice. What was I going to? Oh yes, the other one was, there's a scene in it where I run from round a corner in the village that we were filming in. And two horses clatter down, and I run the opposite direction. It's just a little bit. And I went round the corner, and I was around a corner. They'd say, that's the corner, right? And that's where the camera is. And I'm here. And there's a production manager way over there with a flag to tell me when to run around the corner, right? Because it was quite a wide shot, right? So he couldn't have anybody near me, and he couldn't give a vocal cue because the action had already happened, all right? Horses had to be coming down. So I was there. This old guy comes up behind me. He goes, you're that Mark Strickson, aren't you? What plays Turlough in Doctor Who? So I said, yes, I am, yes. Now I'm looking, he says, my grandson looks like you. Oh, does he? He could do the part much better than you do, though. Right, well, yes, I'm sure he could look. I'm terribly sorry, we're doing a shot here. I'm going to look over there. Ian, if you could just keep back and keep quiet, please. He's much fitter than you are. He looks much stronger than you do. I bet you don't have to be very clever to do your job. And this went on and on. For about 10 minutes, the guy stood there, just knocking me. And off I ran, and I never saw him again. Most extraordinary thing. You see, it's in the wilds of the English countryside you get these people. Because that's where I was brought up. Right, yes.
The thing was, he started off as, he started off as acting. He didn't sort of train as an actor. He started off as a sort of Sylvester. He started off as an entertainer, and he's entertaining. He doesn't. I don't know. If you met him and you were having a quiet conversation, you'd probably think he was quite a serious person, because the sort of theatre that he came sort of like up through is very concerned. He's very politically concerned. He's left-wing way, I'm left, and he gets quite excited. We had all the sort of like election things going on when we were doing it, and everybody was getting very sort of excitable. And he's quite a serious person in that way. He doesn't sort of take life lightly in that sense, but his sort of funniness comes from the fact that he's a performer. He waved his willy in Ireland or something. Was he the first person to show his willy on an Irish stage or something or other? And he's been a escapologist, and he's done all. He's done very. I'd like to have seen. I didn't see him do the Pied Piper at the National Theatre. I think I would have quite liked to have seen him do that. I don't know. He got a lot of the English fans thought his acting was a bit comic strippy at times, and a bit too. I thought the one scene that in Paradise Towers that I thought he did very well, which is a scene that I liked very much because I rated the other actor very highly. What's his name? What was the guy? The Clive.
Clive.
And they just had. And it's funny because it's probably not a scene that you particularly remember, but it's when the doctor had been taken prisoner and he sat talking to the deputy chief.
With the box, going through the rules.
And the thing, and he was, no, that's a different one.
I thought that was a good scene.
That was with the two extras, wasn't it? The rule book, wasn't it? Yeah.
Oh, right. Yes, that was. That's a good scene, though.
But he had a scene, and it was just a very quiet scene, and I thought he acted that. He acted that very well. And I thought Clive acted it very well. It was sort of, I don't know, it's a funny thing about acting. You just sometimes think, oh, they did that well, and it might not be a particularly interesting scene in that way, but something that's just quite watchable about the acting. I don't know whether I've answered your question, really. It's funny, when you're working on Doctor Who, you just sort of like get on with the working, and you don't really spend that much time sort of you're doing the lines, do you know what I mean? So although you spend quite a lot of time with a person, you're doing the same scene. It's like having the same conversation over and over again. So you spend hours and hours and hours with the same person having the same conversation. So you don't actually, apart from the context of what you're doing with them,
when you stop doing that, you can't talk because there must be quiet in the rehearsal room because the director's working his, cameras out.
Yeah, because at the BBC, some rehearsal rooms, you have an area where you rehearse, and then you have a green room where you all sit where you're not involved in a particular scene. Now, they have green rooms at the BBC, but what you actually are supposed to do is you're in a room about twice the size of this, which is the rehearsal room, and everything's taped out. And then, so when you're not actually rehearsing, you've got to sit very quietly. So, anyway, so I've answered your question, have I? Yes.
Another question. Yeah.
Can you give both of you your opinion on the cancellation,
Right.
The cancellation?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah, sure. Doctor Who got cancelled. Doctor Who basically got cancelled because it wasn't getting very good ratings. But I think it was then pointed out mostly by John Nathan Turner. I think you can fairly say that John saved Doctor Who. that the massive sales, that's absolutely true. We may laugh, that's totally true, that you would not have Doctor Who now without JNT. It would be on the pile, because Michael Grade wanted to get rid of it. Simple as that. Michael Grade wanted Doctor Who shut. It wasn't getting the viewers, you know, simple as that. It's caused controversy with Return of the Daleks. A lot of complaints about it, about Return of the Daleks. So Michael Grade thought this was a great chance to get rid of Doctor Who. Now, what had to be pointed out to Michael is that the American sale is worth so much money to the BBC, it doesn't even matter if it doesn't rate in England. That's not who it's being made for. It's being made for the American market. John pointed this out very strongly, even got Michael invited to America. And Michael saw what was going on in America. And Michael went over and launched the Doctor Who caravan, realised that what John was not talking out of his arse about it, and the programme was reinstated. So that is actually what happened. So you can say thank you, JNT, for we still got Doctor Who.
John didn't know about the cancellation at all. And in fact, he was being rung up by the press saying, is it true that Doctor Who's been cancelled? And he go, no. And so, I mean, he felt really eggy. And then he found out about it. And he thought, oh, God. And the thing was, I think Eric had left by then, hadn't he? And Eric and John hadn't, it had been not very pleasant, particularly towards the end. And John was sat there thinking, I'm going to get the sack because nobody's told me and they're cancelling the programme. And then he said he got called into Michael Grade, and he said the funny thing was, John isn't Jewish.
But his name, he could be John Nathan Turlough.
And he must have some looking at him, he looks as if he must have some. And of course, Michael Grade is Jewish, and actually he said he went in, and he suddenly became aware that the thing that was going to save his neck and his job was the fact that this guy thought he was Jewish.
Absolutely true.
It's true, because he said he was really frightened. He thought, right, I'm for the chop. I've had it. And there are always rumours about the fact that the BBC is going to try and get rid of John. And the fact is, he tried for the last 3 years, he was trying to leave Doctor Who. Is it longer? Because he wanted to get an idea off. And he's actually agreed, I think he asked for a silly amount of money.
He did. This time he asked for a silly amount of money to continue as producer, and they gave it him. The reason they gave it him, can I borrow this?
Yeah.
The reason they gave it him is because nobody else will do it. And the reason for that is the workload is immense. Nobody else wants that workload. There are other things in life than working 24 hours a day doing Doctor Who. Now, John goes to America a terrific lot, publicising the programme. He works longer hours than anybody else involved on the programme in London. And he basically does 2 jobs for the price of 1. Sometimes he looks terribly ill because he's just working so hard. And you have to say to John, you're going to have a heart attack if you don't stop. There should be 2 people doing the job.
To go back to what I was talking about earlier, the English class system and the fact that television is run by upper-class people from the south of England who went to private school. John comes from the Midlands and is he looks like somebody who works on a holiday camp sometimes, the sort of his wardrobe. And a lot of the prejudice against John at the BBC has always been for the fact that he's a common little man.
It's common to be a producer.
Didn't go to the right school and all that sort of thing. So I have great sympathy with John about that. I think John has felt that he worked very hard on Doctor Who, and he's been trying to get this other idea off the ground to restart a series called Compact, which they sold to another company, and it was going to be called Impact, Channel 4, and then that's been sold back again. And I think John felt that it should be, in a way, a sort of just reward, that he should be allowed to do his own project. But the thing is, the BBC they've been a bit mean to him in the sense that they just don't want to let him do it. They want to keep him on Doctor Who. Whatever anybody thinks about the programme, it's made money for the BBC.
The good news is that Doctor Who is, because they are spending some more money on it, going through a bit of a revival. The ratings are getting better in England, which is good news. That might mean that it might be made a bit longer. I think we'll get to 30 years, and I think they'll try and chop it again.
But you see, I can sympathise with John, the sort of thing like him wanting to leave and then staying and asking for more money, because the fact is, if he leaves, and the BBC are a bit sort of like, they hire some in-house producers, very few, And then what the BBC has, they have this great system of training directors. They have a trainee director scheme. So what happens is you go and be a trainee director, you work for a couple of years at the BBC for a very low wage because you're a new director, and then you get turfed out and they get in more trainee directors. So you rarely, I mean, you don't, unless on the very prestige products, you rarely ever work with anybody who's been working in television for more than a few years. And John knows that if he doesn't get a project guarantee, that when he leaves, that, I mean, that's it. You're talking about being unemployed, basically. I mean, and you can sympathise with somebody not wanting to be out on their arse, in a sense. And, I mean, good on him if he's got more money for it. Great.
Another question. Yes. Do I think Doctor Who will ever go back to 28 episodes? I think it's a good idea to have more than 4 episodes. I think, for example, Turlough would have worked as a character in longer stories because you would have had time to...
You're talking about shorter series, aren't you?
Oh, you're talking about a shorter season? No, not a chance, not a hope. It will never become popular enough. I mean, it's 14 episodes keeps it going in America, keeps the interest going.
Like business is concerned, you see, as far as they're concerned, Doctor Who fans will watch the same episodes over and over again, so why spend more money making more episodes? Because as long as the series is being made every year, you're still maintaining it. I mean, if Michael Gray probably thought he could get away with making 4 a year, he would. I think it's a bit hard on some of the cast because what actually happens is you become it ties you up. Well, no, it doesn't tie you up as much as it does, but you're talking about just not being paid anything like as much money for being labelled as a Doctor Who assistant or Doctor Who. You're being labelled as that, but you're not getting even the financial rewards that you were getting for your lot of episodes. So, anyway.
Yeah. Yes, right, another question. Yes. Who are my favourite Doctors? Well, Pat Troughton is my favourite Doctor, basically because he used to always carry a hip flask of whiskey in his pocket. And so when it was cold and you were filming, which I only worked with Pat on the 5 Doctors, but Pat would say, "You fancy a little snifter, come this way," and you'd walk behind a bush, you know, and I remember the first occasion that we went to America, it was weird. I hadn't been to America before. These huge stretch limos picked us up at Chicago Airport, and I sat in the back of one of these with Pat and about 3 others. And Pat got his hip flask out and he said, "I think we're going to need this." And we emptied Pat's hip flask, and my God, we needed it, I'm here to tell you. So Pat, but I do think the reason I like Pat as the Doctor was his enormous sense of humour, the marvellous relationship he had with the Brigadier, which I find wonderful in its humour. Marvellous scenes with the Yeti. And
they had a lot of fun when they were working on it then.
Yeah,
I think, you know, there probably was partly the money thing, but they used to have a lot of fun, and Pat used to think up lots of jokes all the time, and they used to...
Fraser's
Fraser's a very silly man and a little boy.
I'll tell you a lovely story about Fraser. Get him at an American convention. Fraser's a great mate of ours. And some of the girls, when they do conventions, tend to start on very convoluted answers to the question, you know, like, I mean, some silly American will say, "Can you answer, please, why didn't you move your left hand on the TARDIS when the Doctor was saying something, you know, And there is a certain Doctor Who female assistant who will answer this question for about 20 minutes, who will remain nameless. And she just witters on and on and on. And I was on this panel, and after about 20 minutes, she eventually finished this. And I was hosting the panel, and before I even had a chance to say anything, a little voice came from the back. "Excuse me, but I didn't quite get the answer to that. Would you mind repeating it, please?" And it was Fraser at the back of the hall. And this certain Doctor Who female assistant has not got a great sense of humour and started all over again. I had to point out that it was Fraser winding her up. But Fraser is full of things like that, and I'm sure they had a hoot, and he's got a wonderful sense of humour, and so's Pat. Well, you were going to say something. Who's your favourite Doctor?
Oh, my favourite Doctor's Pat. I said that earlier, though.
Julie had a television when she was young. I didn't have a television, you see, so I could never watch Doctor Who.
But it is. I mean, he made me laugh. He's not, but sort of in the 5 Doctors. I just think he's so funny, and the stories. the stories I remember as being frightening from Doctor Who as a child, with sort of things like the Yetis and stuff. I mean, I love all that stuff, and I suppose because my dad was Scottish, I loved all the sort of like tartan and things like that.
Another question. Yes, you may be so well.
I know you've been going for some time. I should give you a break.
Oh,
Anyway, I'd like to
thank you.
Mark Strickson and Julie Brennan for coming this afternoon.
Collins. And apart from the fact that you sound like a fairly bad imitation of lots of other people, there is actually someone called Julie Collins.
She sang in Senator Clouds, didn't she?
Judy Collins. No, I have a story about that. Well, I went to America when I was 18 and I rang up this guy that I was... Hello? I rang up this bloke I was staying with in America, and I got this other girl in his office, and she said, who is it? And I said, Julie Collins. And she heard this voice, and she went back, Judy Collins is on the phone for you. And she just sort of thought it was, she just got very confused by it. But anyway, somebody else was called Julie Collins with an equity membership. So I thought, what can I have? And I thought, you see, I come from a sort of stock of completely common names. And my mother's maiden name was Davis, and I thought Julie Davis, there's bound to be a Julie Davis, and I thought, what a boring name. And I thought, well, Julie, but you see, this is it. I probably sound like a bad imitation of her. But
do the Australian accent.
but the fact was, I thought, also there's a psychological thing. We have a thing called spotlight, and you thought, if I've got to go anywhere in the alphabet, I want to go nearer the front, because it does work like that sometimes. I mean, I've got a commercial. I got a very lucrative commercial because the casting director knew it didn't really particularly matter who did it, and thought they wanted small females, and got to B. And the two of us that did the commercial, both our names began with a B. So I thought, well, I'll go the other way. And I thought, well, my grandma's maiden name was Brennan. And strange as it may seem, I just didn't know how to spell it. And I spelt it with an O. And I got stuck with it everywhere after. And all these Irish people come up to me and say, why is it spelt with an O? Extraordinary name. Anyway. Is that it?
The other thing is Julie gets, because she's Julie Brennan, she gets called up for these Irish parts. Julie can't do an Irish accent to save her life.
Anyway, for what it's worth, it's not very good, but I think you should
Hope you open, Julie.
try that.
That's one of those. You have to open it. I don't know what it is exactly. And then it goes in another box, and then it goes in a bit of paper. Got your hand, you've got your shirt here, right?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Thank you very much.
That's all right.
Julie can hold it up because she's got dirty hands anyway.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
There we are.
Okay, so next on the program to give these guys a few rest, get their food in before they die of starvation and malnutrition and look like Ethiopians. We present to you a short segment of clips and interviews from Doctor Who. That'll run for about 45 minutes, and then I'll come back and we'll do a photo session and autographs. Okay?
There you go.
Oh, yeah. Compared to others.
Zooming on my face, I cracked the lens.
Would your artist accept payment of £2.50 every 10
You've had your money back? Yes. Then that's all Feminist International. Oh, wow.
That's refreshing. You don't know the
I don't know who to give it to.
You don't even get £2.50.
Oh, we could have another membership. No need companion and your pin on the side. I packed the pin away except for the...
From our record, we have not known the time.
Superbox site.
No, not Superbox. Complete blank one.
That you've been given them by somebody else.
Yes. People like to get their stories. Stories synopses.
You'd like to do another one?
Change the H and do big H. So...
Hello.
I only get one sign now.
Oh, I don't
Superbox.
Make it better.
Getting the Simon book. Oh.
Yeah. I only got mine Monday, 3 days earlier.
You have some about?
Nothing. No, I don't.
He does too.
Oh, good. There's Darren. I watched him about 2 weeks or 3 years.
Shame.
$4,000 by then, shouldn't you? He'll pay for it, okay?
Yeah, all right, okay.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Oh, well, temporarily.
Yeah, I'll pay for it.
Only guy I know waited So did he.
I'm not very. I haven't seen
I'll give you a paradise town.
You want?
I've been Dr. Who's voice, so when there's this, that's why you get it. First of all, it's paradise. Maybe don't like it, but then what you get is very well written. In one way, when you go to that's one. Get on it. Anybody get a camera?
Brilliant. Brilliant. Photo session. Fresh.
It's photo and we can go.
It goes green if you need a flash.
No green, no green.
No, you just can't put it.
No.
Okay.
Yes, you can.
I wouldn't keep moving.
The day will end.
Thank you. It will eventually. Go on. Okay, I'll do it.
No, it's okay.
Well, go ahead. Okay. Well, you must.
Oh, let's just have a gang shot.
Okay.
Oh.
Get the dog.
Get the dog.
You press the button as well.
That's it. Didn't even wind it on. You used to automatics, Rog.
Lee's up next.
So is there any more left, or?
Yep, we have one more.
Well, smile.
Your turn.
Hey, Jeff, we should get them.
Very tactful.
Close up with the autograph.
Up at the Joe ice cream shop.
This is the aftermark. After handle now, we're all going to check it out.
What do you think about having a collection on my Sammy?